So, as Joanne said, I'm Christian. That's me up there on the Twitter thing. And slides are online if anyone wants to follow along. It's just an option. So we all know that Backbone has this specific stated goal, and that is to be the minimum set of components needed to let you, the developer, roll your own application framework, right, depending on your specific needs. But a lot of patterns evolve over time, and that's why, for instance, we have Marionette, which handles a bunch of view patterns that are common and everyone was doing their own version of. We have Backbone Radio, which really simplifies a bunch of communication between disparate components of your application. And in that same vein, I decided to make Backbone.Hoard to simplify and codify how you access and manage the data in Backbone applications. And I do this through two common strategies. One is XHR consolidation, which is basically only ever making one request at a time to any given endpoint, and caching. So don't request data if you've requested it before. So this evolved really because of two use cases I needed in my application at work. We have a big dashboard application, which is user-controlled data, right? They control what data gets loaded on the page. It adds a bunch of complexity, and we can't do any sort of like static optimization there. And route-specific data. So if you go to a route, you fetch some data specific to that route, and you go to another route, and then you go back, right? You don't want to fetch that data again. You want to keep it around. You want to give a faster experience. You don't want to hammer your servers with unneeded requests. First, let's talk about dashboard applications. So, for instance, you could have a dashboard. A user creates it. They make 4 of these widgets here, each fetching from a different endpoint. And that's a pretty good case, right? You're not going to be requesting duplicate data. Let's say your page loads up. You make 4 separate XHRs to 4 separate endpoints, and you all get your data back, they all populate. But we could have this case, right? We could have 4 views, but they're only dependent on 2 endpoints. And so you might wonder, why are there 4 views but only 2 endpoints? But this is kind of like the classic MVC case right here, right? We have models, which are our data, which we can represent in multiple ways, which are our views. So even though they could be using the same data, they could be presenting it in different ways. Yeah. And you could even end up with this case, right? Everything on this page is requesting the exact same data, and that's no good, right? These can be expensive requests, and just really being a real drain on both page performance and your servers. And so this is where Hoard kind of comes in, right? It only lets, it intercepts all of these requests at once, and then it only lets one of them actually go through to the server, and it populates each individual model, and those are instances of models. It populates each one of those with the exact same data from the response. And so this is XHR consolidation, right? Prevent multiple simultaneous requests to the same endpoint.
You mean the same request?
Oh, right. We're preventing, yeah, so multiple simultaneous requests to one endpoint, we only let one go through. Right. And so in code, it kind of looks like this. Can you see that anywhere? But basically, we have the entry point to Hoard, which is this Backbone.Hoard control. Let's see, yeah, that right up there, which is the entry point, and that has this getModelSync method on it, which kind of returns a Hoard-aware sync method for your specific model, so you can override whatever model you want to add cache-specific behavior to. It's not one of those global Backbone patch the world type things. It only it only hooks into the individual model. And we have this URL method, which is dependent on the ID, and that kind of determines, what it actually goes to. And Hoard is going to use this to identify the uniqueness of a model based on the URL that it corresponds to. And then we make 2 models with the same ID just to demonstrate the fetching capabilities. And then what you can kind of do, and this is basically simulating a dashboard load, right, where a bunch of requests go out at once. You fetch them both at the same time, and that's just standard Backbone, fetch code. But only one actual AJAX request is made. And doing this, we've been able to see like some of our user dashboards speed up by like 10 times just because of the endpoints they were hitting and because we weren't using this sort of caching behavior, or XHR consolidation behavior before. So the second use case for Hoard comes in route-specific data, right? We have this application, we can click around, so we select information for this user, which is me now. We select information for past me, hair and a smile, not there anymore. And then we can, go back to me, right? And so we don't want to fetch that data multiple times if we're just going to be, doing that possibly within a span of a few seconds, right? We provide links to everything, and so we just want to keep that data around as long as we can, right? And so this is caching, right? Don't do a request if we've done it before. Just get the same data, use the same response. And this is very doable without Hoard, right? You can do this in native Backbone. And one of the more common ways I've seen this done is you have a bunch of models that you're storing in a collection. Let's see if I can. Nope. Guess not. Cannot zoom in. So we have a collection that stores models. If you hit a route, you try to get that model from the collection. If it's not there, you have to make a new model with your given ID, for instance. You have to fetch it, you add it to your collection, and it's there for the next time you come around to it. So this, it's fine. It works. It's not terrible, and it can be, easily wrapped up. But with Hoard, all you do is you make a new model, and you fetch it, and then you do your route. And this has kind of a paradigm shift from the previous implementation, right? If you have a collection, you're storing models, you have the same model for all of your routes, and that's the same model instance. So we have a combination of the data we're storing and kind of the value we're attaching to that in the application. So you can set up listeners that might accidentally persist. You can possibly corrupt that data. If you have, for instance, an edit form and you cancel and you have some sort of bad behavior in there, or you have to specifically guard against that. And so in the same way that Marionette makes views disposable with regions, right? You just make a view and then you show it and you don't hold on to it at all. The region does that for you. Hoard lets you just treat your models as disposable at the highest layer, and then you pass it down to the individual things that need it. And so this is cool, but there are other caching implementations out there, right? There are plenty of other options. So we have Backbone plugins, for instance, right? There's Fetch Cache, there's Caching Sync. They're very good plugins. They do a very good job at what they set out to do. But my particular problem with them is that their storage layers are entirely synchronous, so that basically lets you use one of three choices. You have in-memory storage, you have local storage, or session storage, right? So those are all synchronous APIs. But what if you want to, for instance, use IndexedDB, right? That's an asynchronous API. If you want to keep your information on a Redis instance or CouchDB, that's all asynchronous in nature. And so from the ground up, Hoard is just an entirely asynchronous, all behind the scenes, including the storage layer, so you can hook into any of those asynchronous storage you want, right? You can use an entirely different server just for caching data. Hoard doesn't care as long as you just store your data and it works. So it's Backbone plugins. But what about just standard HTTP cache headers, right? These are they've been around for a while, they're well tested, they're implementations in every major browser. So you have cache control, which you can set an expiration header. Your information has this long to live. That's really good, for instance, for JavaScript files. For instance, if you only publish once a day, you can say, hey, fetch again by end of tomorrow. Same with the CSS files and everything, but it's not good for application data where you want to have more granular control. And then there are e-tags, which are basically hash comparisons, right? Your browser sends down, I have this hash for this data, and if that hash doesn't match what the server has, then the server responds with new data. Otherwise, it doesn't respond with anything. And this is also really good, and it's especially good for longer-lived data. But for the short-term caching that Hoard is kind of designed for, you still have to make an XHR request for an XHR for each one of these e-tag things. So if you have, if you hit a route again and again and again, you're still going to send out an XHR instead of just using the knowledge that you have. And that's kind of it for what Hoard has right now. But what I'm really excited about is what I'm going to build on top of this, or the plans I have for it. And that's URL interpretation to really take advantage of all of these really good patterns that we see in each of our individual RESTful APIs. Right? So if you have a good REST API, then you see some things pop up a lot of times. Right? So you can have pagination, for instance, which takes a page or an offset. You can have individual filters, for instance, just filtering by odd ID or even ID, or you can have fetch a collection but only get models with IDs 1, 2, and 3. And so what I want to do is I want to expose this to developers, right? Allow developers to capture these patterns on the client, to use the data you already have in your cache in a reasonable manner. Right? So if we have a collection and we have a filtered collection and they both point to the same root information, right? They're both referring to the same core collection, but one happens to be a filtered subset of that data. We can fetch both of those immediately, and Hoard will only let the full collection one go through, and it will actually apply the filter that the developer has declared on the client to that collection and pass that to the filter collection. So future work, but it's kind of it'll be kind of like an ORM type field on the client side. So that's it. Here are some links. It's on Gitter. I'm on Gitter if anyone wants to use this and has problems or questions or anything. So just the Marionette Gitter has been really good for the community. So I've been talking to people on Gitter about this and really trying to see what they're using and how they're benefiting from it. So some questions. So any questions? Yes.
So I know that you mentioned that you want to implement all the different dynamic looking filters like offset, where it's actually aware of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Does it support static filters? Like, say for example, I'm loading up a collection, and my URL would be something like /items status equals deleted. Would it actually be able to cache that specific route, or would it reload the entire collection?
Right. So that was about can Hoard currently cache static filters? And how it works now is it just takes your URL for your model and it uses that as the cache key. So anything matching that URL will be cached, and if that same URL is requested again, it will use that. Yes.
So you mentioned, it takes multiple requests that are simultaneous and does one request. At what point does that validate? If I'm pulling real-time data and I actually want to make another request instead of getting that cache version, how do I configure to
Okay. So that was about cache invalidation or just no XHR consolidation?
It was more about how can you invalidate the XHR consolidation and do an actual another request?
Right, so that is actually a case where I would probably explicitly disable XHR consolidation there and just leave the caching in place. Because it seems like you want to get each of those individual requests for your polling for real-time data. And Hoard kind of provides that configurability to just do one or the other.
Maybe it expires properly?
Yes, we have. There is a recipe for automatic cache expiration. That is not currently implemented for debounce this XHR consolidation X number of seconds or for X number of requests.
I also think at one point in time you said something about how the existing model data is treated. So if I fetch, say, one model and it's used in two different locations. One of the locations edits the model data, but doesn't save it to the server yet. Is the model in the other model effective?
The data. So if you have two models, and they both get their data from the same cache, and you edit one model and don't write it back, what would happen in that case? This is actually explicitly why I kind of made Hoard in the first place, because we were having problems with shared data, shared cache data. So until you actually write back to the server, the other model will not be aware of the individual edits. And that was an intentional design decision. If you were to save that data and then read back from the cache, it would be populated.
I got you. And if I actually wanted the opposite of that behavior, so to actually share the same model, including being able to trigger events on it, etc., would that be possible with Hoard?
That could be possible with Hoard, but I would probably take more of a dependency injection approach there. Set up your kind of service locator of just, when you request this model, get this specific instance, and I'm going to share it across these different components and use that for communication.